He shattered a car window with his bare hands to rescue a choking child, only to be called a kidnapper moments later. As strangers curse him and cameras roll, no one cares he's a war hero with nothing but an old veteran card and faded photos to prove who he is. Will anyone listen before it's too late? The late morning sun beat down on the asphalt, shimmering off the parked cars along the suburban street. Walter Harris, his back aching but his spirit undeterred, slowly pushed his weathered bicycle along the cracked pavement. Its basket, usually laden with cans and bottles he collected for recycling, was empty today. He was just enjoying the quiet of the morning, the simple rhythm of his worn sneakers against the ground. Suddenly, a sound cut through the gentle hum of the neighborhood. "Mommy! Mommy!" The cries were faint, almost swallowed by the ambient city noise, but they were clear enough to grab Walter's attention. He paused, his hand tightening on the bicycle's handlebars, and looked around. No one. The street was largely empty, storefronts still quiet, save for a few early shoppers. "Mommy!" The call came again, more urgent this time, edged with panic. Walter, his brow furrowed with concern, strained to locate the source. He scanned the houses, the trees, until his gaze landed on a sleek, dark sedan parked a few meters ahead, directly under the unforgiving glare of the sun. Its windows were rolled up tight, trapping the heat within. As he drew closer, a faint, muffled sobbing became audible, undeniably coming from inside the car. His heart quickened. He peered into the tinted window, shading his eyes with a trembling hand. There, in the back seat, was a small boy, no older than 4, his face flushed crimson, pressed against the glass, his tiny hands pounding weakly on the window. His eyes, wide with terror, were already glistening with tears. He was clearly in distress. Walter's first instinct was to find the child's parent. He hammered on the window with his knuckles, calling out loudly, "Hello? Is anyone here? Little one, are you all right?" His voice, raspy from age, was lost against the thick glass. He tried the car doors, pulling firmly on the handles, but they were all locked tight. He ran around the vehicle, calling into the empty street, searching desperately for an owner, a passerby, anyone who could help. The heat radiating from the car's metal frame was alarming, a clear indication of how quickly the interior was becoming an oven. And then his gaze dropped to the front of the car. A thin, ominous wisp of smoke was beginning to curl from beneath the edge of the hood, barely visible at first, but growing steadily. His mind, sharpened by years of crisis in a different life, immediately registered the danger. The car wasn't just hot, it was about to catch fire. The child inside was not just trapped, he was in mortal peril. A surge of adrenaline, cold and sharp, shot through Walter's veins. He looked around one last time. Still no one. Just the suffocating heat, the frantic cries of the child, and the insidious plume of smoke. There was no time to lose. His hands, gnarled and scarred by age and labor, began to tremble, but his resolve hardened. He had to act. Breaking a window carried consequences, property damage, potential legal trouble. And as an old black man in worn clothes, he knew all too well how quickly a good deed could be misinterpreted, how suspicion could cling to him. But the image of the little boy's desperate reddened face, the rising smoke, they eclipsed all fear of personal repercussion. A child's life was paramount. He looked around for something, anything. His eyes landed on a large, jagged rock near the curb. With a grunt of effort, he bent down, his aching joints protesting, and picked it up. He raised the rock, his arm trembling slightly with the effort, aimed at the back passenger window, the furthest from the child, to minimize risk of injury from shattered glass. With a surge of desperation, he brought the rock down with all his might. The impact sent a jarring shockwave up his arm. The glass, thick and resistant, spiderwebbed, but didn't shatter. He hit it again, then again, gritting his teeth, fueled by the child's now desperate, choking sobs. On the 4th strike, with a loud, violent crack, the safety glass finally gave way, crumbling into 1,000 tiny, dull pieces that rained inward. Almost instantly, the car's alarm shrieked, a piercing, deafening wail that echoed through the quiet street, announcing his crime to the world. Ignoring the blaring siren and the stinging pain from the glass shards that had nicked his hand, drawing beads of crimson, Walter reached into the now broken window. His trembling fingers fumbled with the child's seatbelt buckle, finally releasing it. He gently, carefully pulled the crying, terrified boy through the jagged opening, cradling him in his arms as he stumbled back from the smoking car. The little boy, gasping for air, clung to Walter, burying his face in the old man's faded uniform. He was safe. But the ordeal had just begun. The blaring alarm had done its job. Just as Walter was catching his breath, a woman burst out of a nearby clothing boutique, her face contorted with panic. She was the mother. Her eyes, wide and frantic, first fixed on the blaring car alarm, then on the broken window, and finally on Walter Harris holding her child. Her gaze swept over him, taking in his appearance, his faded, worn military-style jacket, the tattered netting of his old pith helmet still adorned with a vintage insignia, the weary lines on his face. And then her eyes landed on his dark skin. In that split second, her panic, fear, and deeply ingrained prejudice combined, overriding any rational thought. She didn't see a rescuer. She didn't see the smoke or the broken glass or the relief on her child's face. She saw only a large, imposing black man in disheveled clothing holding her child near a damaged car. "My baby," she shrieked, her voice high-pitched and laced with pure terror. She rushed forward, snatched her son from Walter's arms, clutching him protectively to her chest. Then, her eyes blazing with fury, she pointed a trembling finger directly at Walter. This man kidnapped my child." Walter froze, the shock hitting him like a physical blow. He stared at her, his mind reeling. Kidnapped? After all that? After risking his own life, after enduring the pain of the broken glass, after fighting his own fear to save her son? His heart, which had just swollen with relief at the child's safety, now plummeted into an abyss of bewildered despair. He stood there, his hands still bleeding from the cuts, the blaring alarm mocking him, utterly speechless, the unjust accusation hanging heavy in the air. The piercing shriek of the car alarm, coupled with the mother's desperate, accusatory wail, sliced through the quiet suburban calm like a siren. Within moments, the street, which had been almost deserted, began to swell with a growing crowd of curious onlookers. Neighbors emerged from their homes, shoppers abandoned their errands, all drawn by the commotion. Their eyes, initially curious, quickly settled on Walter Harris, the old black man, disheveled, bleeding, holding a small child near a smashed car window. The narrative instantly and dangerously became fixed. "Look at him," someone from the crowd yelled, pointing. "He's black, you know they're not trustworthy." The words, raw and prejudiced, sliced through the air, immediately poisoning the atmosphere. Others chimed in, their voices a chorus of judgment. "Probably a vagrant trying to steal the kid," another shouted. "Or rob the car." A phone flashed, its camera lens pointing directly at Walter, recording his stunned, bewildered face, already presumed guilty in the court of public opinion. The collective anger, fueled by the mother's frantic accusation, began to simmer and boil, transforming curiosity into a hostile mob mentality. Walter, still reeling from the mother's baseless accusation, tried desperately to explain. His voice, raspy and trembling with shock and disbelief, was barely audible above the growing din of insults and smartphone clicks. "I'm not kidnapping anyone," he pleaded, his gaze darting from the furious mother to the judgmental faces in the crowd. "I saw the little boy trapped in the car, he was choking, he couldn't breathe, there was smoke." He gestured weakly towards the still smoking hood of the car, the broken glass glistening on the ground, the very evidence of his heroic act. But his words were utterly lost, drowned out by the rising tide of condemnation. No one listened. No one looked for proof beyond his appearance. The narrative of the black man kidnapping a child was too compelling, too easy for their biases to embrace. They saw only what they expected to see, not the truth of a life-saving intervention. His shoulders slumped in weary resignation. His eyes, already red from the stress and the child's desperate cries, now welled up with unshed tears of profound injustice. His hand, still bleeding from the glass shards that had embedded themselves in his skin, throbbed with a dull ache, a physical reminder of the violent act he'd committed for the child's sake. He clamped his mouth shut, his explanation dying on his lips. What was the point? They had already judged him. He just stood there, the blaring car alarm still screaming its chaotic symphony, a silent, bleeding monument to misunderstood heroism. "I just wanted to save him," he mumbled to himself, the words barely a whisper, a heartbroken lament that only the hot, humid air seemed to hear. Moments later, the wail of police sirens cut through the noise. 2 patrol cars skidded to a halt. Officers quickly assessed the scene, a distraught mother, a crying child, a broken car window, and an old black man with blood on his hands, surrounded by an angry, vocal crowd. The conclusion for them seemed obvious. Without much questioning or a deeper inquiry into the smoking hood or the child's distressed state, Walter Harris, the rescuer, was swiftly taken into custody. The handcuffs clicked shut around his wrists, a chilling sound of injustice as he was led towards the patrol car, leaving behind the cacophony of the crowd and the silent, undeniable truth of his selfless act. The stark, fluorescent lights of the police precinct cast a harsh, unforgiving glow on Walter Harris. He sat on a cold, hard bench, the scent of antiseptic and stale coffee hanging in the air. His injured hand, still seeping blood from the shattered glass, throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, but it was the profound chill of injustice that truly permeated his bones. He watched as a young officer barely out of uniform academy approached him. The officer's face was set in a sneer of undisguised contempt, his eyes already narrowed in judgment before a single word was spoken. "All right, old man," the officer began, his voice flat and dismissive, laced with a casual arrogance. "Let's get your information. Name? Address? ID." His tone implied that Walter was not just a suspect, but a nuisance, a confirmed criminal. Walter, feeling the weight of the officer's prejudice, slowly reached into his faded, worn jacket. He didn't have a wallet, no driver's license, no modern forms of identification that most people carried. All he possessed were a few cherished remnants of a life once lived, now faded into obscurity. He carefully pulled out a battered, laminated veteran's ID card, its edges frayed, its photo blurred by time. Alongside it, wrapped in a tattered piece of cloth, were a few black and white photographs from his youth, images of a strong, vibrant young man in uniform, his arm around a smiling comrade, both full of life and purpose, a stark contrast to the weary, broken figure before the officer. These were his most treasured possessions, the silent witnesses to his forgotten past. The officer took the card, barely glancing at it before scoffing. "A veteran's card, huh? And these old pictures?" He tossed them back onto the bench with a dismissive flick of his wrist, his gaze sweeping over Walter's faded clothes, his dark skin, his stooped posture. "No proper ID, just some old war relics and a broken-down bike outside? Yeah, that just screams upstanding citizen, doesn't it?" His voice was dripping with sarcasm, his words a blatant judgment based solely on Walter's appearance and lack of conventional documents. "Look, old man," the officer continued, his voice hardening, his patience clearly exhausted. "We've got a distressed mother, a damaged car, and a clear accusation of kidnapping. You fit the profile. So, unless you've got something real to say, something that actually makes sense, I'm going to have to place you under arrest." He began to reach for his handcuffs, the cold metal glinting under the harsh lights, ready to solidify Walter's unjust fate. Walter closed his eyes, a silent sigh escaping his lips. This was it. After all he had done, all he had endured, this was to be his reward. Just as the metallic click of handcuffs seemed imminent, the door to the interrogation room swung open. The police chief, a man of imposing stature and a seasoned gaze, stepped in. His eyes, sharp and perceptive, swept across the scene, the young, arrogant officer, the distressed mother still clutching her child in the corner, and then settling on Walter Harris. The chief's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He took a step, then another, his gaze fixed on Walter's face, then on the tattered veteran's ID card lying on the bench, and finally on the old pith helmet with its faded insignia. A flicker of recognition, then deep respect, dawned in his eyes. This was no ordinary suspect. Sergeant Major Harris, the chief's voice boomed, cutting through the tension, tinged with genuine surprise and honor. He walked directly to Walter, completely bypassing the younger officer, and extended his hand, a gesture of profound respect. "Is that truly you, sir?" Walter Harris, the ace pilot, the Black Hawk of the Pacific, who shot down dozens of enemy planes during the war. His voice was filled with a reverence that stunned everyone in the room. The younger officer froze, his hands still hovering near his handcuffs, his face a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. The mother, who had been whispering comfort to her child, looked up, her eyes wide with bewilderment. Walter, surprised by the chief's recognition, slowly took the chief's outstretched hand, a faint, weary smile touching his lips. "That was a long time ago, Chief," he murmured, his voice gruff but appreciative. The chief turned to his bewildered subordinate, his expression now stern. "Officer, what exactly is going on here?" The young officer, flustered and stammering, finally found his voice. He had just heard his chief refer to this vagrant as a legendary war hero. His earlier arrogance visibly crumbled. "Sir? Chief? This man, he's the kidnapper." The mother identified him. He gestured awkwardly towards the distraught woman. The chief's gaze sharpened, piercing the young officer. "A kidnapper, you say?" he questioned, his voice dangerously low. "On what basis, officer? What evidence do you have to support such a serious claim? Did you conduct a thorough investigation? Did you ascertain the full circumstances?" The young officer faltered. He had no evidence, no thorough investigation, only the mother's frantic accusation and his own racial bias. He stammered, unable to form a coherent answer. "Well, he was holding the child, the car window was broken, and he didn't have proper ID, Chief." The chief's eyes narrowed. "You're telling me you were about to arrest a decorated war hero, a man who dedicated his entire youth to defending this nation based on nothing but assumptions and appearances?" His voice was laced with barely controlled fury. "Are you prosecuting a case based on racial prejudice, officer?" The accusation hung heavy in the air, undeniable and shaming. The young officer's face went white. He knew he was caught. His initial contempt now twisted into sheer panic and self-loathing. "No, Chief. No, sir. I'm sorry, Chief. I made a mistake. My apologies, sir." He stammered, desperate to retract his words to undo his judgmental actions. At that precise moment, a small, clear voice cut through the tense silence. The little boy, who had finally calmed down enough in his mother's arms, looked up, his eyes bright and innocent. He had been listening, absorbing the adult drama around him. "He saved me," the child declared, pointing a small finger at Walter. His voice was steady now, filled with the simple, undeniable truth of a child. "I was in the car and I couldn't breathe. I called for Mommy, but she didn't answer and I was so scared." He looked at Walter, his eyes filled with gratitude. "He broke the window and he pulled me out. He saved me." The mother, who had been clutching her child tightly, heard her son's words. Her eyes widened in shock, then in profound realization. The smoke, the broken glass, her son's distressed cries, it all flooded back, now seen through the lens of truth. Her initial fear and prejudice had completely blinded her. The overwhelming shame washed over her face, turning it crimson. She had accused the man who had risked his life for her child. She gently placed her son down and rushed towards Walter, her previous fury replaced by abject humility. "Oh my God! Sir! I am so incredibly, terribly sorry," she stammered, her words tumbling out in a torrent of apologies. I thought. I was so panicked. I saw the broken window and I never meant to accuse you. You saved my son. Please, can you ever forgive me?" Tears welled in her eyes, tears of remorse and gratitude. The chief, seeing the truth fully confirmed, looked at his now mortified officer. "Officer," he stated, his voice firm, "you will be writing a full report on this incident, detailing your egregious error in judgment, and reflecting on the severe consequences of racial profiling. This will be a formal entry in your record." The young officer, utterly humiliated, nodded mutely, knowing he deserved every word. A short while later, Walter Harris, no longer a suspect but a revered hero, walked out of the police precinct. His hand was bandaged, carefully treated by the precinct medic. Beside him walked the mother, still profusely apologizing, and her little boy, whose hand was now clasped tightly in Walter's. The child looked up at Walter, his face beaming. "Grandpa!" the little boy exclaimed. A new word for a new, beloved figure in his life. He tugged at Walter's hand, his small voice filled with joy. The mother stopped, looking at Walter with earnest eyes. "Sergeant Major Harris," she began, her voice soft and humble. "My family, we owe you everything. You saved my son's life. We have a spare room at our house. It's not much, but if you wouldn't mind, would you consider coming to live with us? My son would love to have you around. He already calls you Grandpa." She looked at her son, who nodded vigorously, his eyes wide with hope. "Please," she pleaded, "let us repay you even in this small way. We'd be honored." Walter looked at the boy, who was now gazing up at him with such pure adoration, and then at the mother, whose genuine remorse and heartfelt invitation touched a chord deep within his lonely heart. He, who had lived a solitary life after dedicating his youth to a nation that had seemed to forget him, was suddenly being offered a home, a family, and, most importantly, a bond with an innocent child. Tears, warm and unexpected, welled in his eyes, blurring the bright sunlight. He swallowed hard, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes," Walter said, the single word of profound acceptance, a testament to a life finally finding solace and belonging. "Yes, I would. Thank you." His heart, long bruised by injustice and neglect, finally felt a flicker of warmth, a sense of belonging he hadn't known in decades. He had saved a life, and in doing so, he had, perhaps, saved his own. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any thoughts or opinions about this story, feel free to leave a comment below. I'd love to hear what you think. And if you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to our channel to support us. Your support means the world. Thank you again.